Hi, I'm Avelis and welcome to my channel. Today, a story about how far someone is willing to go for the people they love and what they're willing to risk when they have nothing left to lose. Let's see where it leads.
Valdenmoor smelled like all port towns: salt and fish and old rope, and the kind of ambition that arrives by sea and rarely leaves the same way it came. Dorian Ashvale had been there for 2 days and was running out of money. He had arrived with a name on a piece of paper and the specific determination of a man who has decided to do something before thinking it all the way through. The name was a place, Iron Hollow, a settlement on the far side of the Ashwater Passage, 3 days out by sea. A place where, according to a letter from a sailor he had never met, someone matching his brother's description had been seen alive. Thomas had been gone for 4 years. Dorian did not let himself think the word alive too directly or too often. It had a way of making the alternative feel closer. The docks had been a swift education. The Ashwater Passage in October was, he learned, the kind of route that navigated itself by removing the captains who underestimated it. Unpredictable currents, shifting rocks, weather that arrived without warning. He spoke to 11 captains over 2 days and received 11 variations of the same answer. Nobody was going to Iron Hollow, not in October. By the evening of his second day, he was in a tavern called the Anchor's Rest, with a cup of something that claimed to be wine, looking at the piece of paper with Thomas's name on it. The tavern was not large or distinguished. Low ceilings, heavy tables, the smell of tallow candles and salted fish. The kind of place that does not try to be anything other than what it is. He was on his second cup of the questionable wine when he heard the conversation at the table behind him. 2 men, both with the look and vocabulary of people who spent their working lives at sea. They were talking with the easy, rambling quality of men well into their evening, not directing their words at anyone in particular, simply filling the space the way conversation fills spaces in taverns. Because silence in a tavern feels like something that needs to be fixed. Tell you, strangest 3 weeks of my life, and I've had some strange weeks. The passage, the other said. Autumn Crossing. Swore I'd never do it again after the first time. And then Zola offered, and I thought, well, you don't say no to Zola. Dorian went very still. She take the full route? Iron Hollow and back. Smooth as you like, considering. Hit weather on the second day out. Sky had been clear all morning. You know how it goes out there. The passage doesn't warn you. But she read it before the rest of us even felt the wind change. Had us ready before the worst of it hit. A pause, and the sound of a cup being set down. Best captain I've ever sailed with. I'll say that without any hesitation. She's still running that route? Far as I know. Got her own ship now, the Veira. Berth 7 last I heard. You'd know it when you see it. And she takes passengers? She takes anything. Cargo, passengers, whatever needs moving. Doesn't care much for asking questions either, which is useful depending on what you're moving. Another pause. Fair warning, though, she's not what you'd expect. Take some adjusting to. How so? You'll see. Let's just say, you'll see. Both men laughed at something Dorian couldn't quite follow, and the conversation drifted to other things. He sat for a moment with his cup. Then he set it down, folded the piece of paper with Thomas's name on it, and put it back in his coat pocket. Berth 7, the Veira. He was there before sunrise. The docks at that hour had a quality of suspension. The day not yet begun, the night mostly finished. The water moving in the darkness with the slow self-possession of something that does not observe human schedules. A few lanterns burned at intervals along the pier, casting long, unsteady reflections on the black water below. Somewhere further along the dock, a cargo was being loaded, the muffled sounds of labor and low voices carrying clearly in the pre-dawn quiet. Berth 7 was not difficult to find. The Vera was a mid-sized vessel, not large enough to be impressive at first glance, but with the compact solidity of a ship that has been maintained with serious attention. The lines were tight. The deck was clear. There was nothing decorative about her, nothing added for appearance. Every part of the ship looked like it was there because it did something. Dorian stood on the pier and looked up at her in the early darkness and tried to identify the specific feeling he was having. He was afraid of the water. He had always been afraid of the water, which had not been a relevant fact until approximately now. Thomas had been the one who loved the sea, talked about it their entire childhood, knew the names of ships and routes and currents like other boys knew horses. They had built a raft together one summer from scavenged wood and optimism. It had lasted 40 minutes before expressing a structural opinion about its own design. Thomas had laughed until he couldn't breathe. Dorian had been 14 and furious, and had eventually laughed too. Thomas had left 3 years later on his first voyage, and had not come back. Dorian put his hands in his coat pockets, found a smooth edge of the folded paper, and looked at the ship. "You've been standing there for 4 minutes. The voice came from the deck above him, low, unhurried, with the quality of someone who has been watching him since he arrived and has only now decided to acknowledge it. He looked up. She was standing at the rail, with her arms resting on it, and the particular ease of someone in complete possession of where they are. In the low lantern light from the dock, the details resolved slowly. The height of her, which was the first thing, the breadth of her shoulders, the gray-green cast of her skin that confirmed what the man in the tavern had already suggested. She was looking down at him with an expression that was not unfriendly and not friendly, but was paying close attention. An orc, a captain, looking at him like he was mildly interesting and possibly a waste of her time. 4 minutes. Most people who want something knock. "I wasn't sure you were awake," Dorian said. "I'm always awake at dawn." She tilted her head slightly. "You're not a sailor." It was not a question. "I'm looking for passage," Dorian said, "to Iron Hollow." A pause. "In October." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. Then she straightened up from the rail and said, "Come up." The deck of the Vera up close confirmed what it had suggested from the pier, a ship run with the economy of someone for whom every inch of space and every item of equipment had a purpose and a place. Zola stood near the mast with her arms crossed, watching him come up the gangplank with the assessing look of someone who evaluates things for a living. Up close she was, if anything, more immediately striking than from the pier. She had the build of someone who had spent years doing real physical work at sea, her arms and shoulders carrying the kind of strength that comes not from effort aimed at appearance, but from years of hauling rope and navigating weather and simply doing what the sea demands of the people who work on it. She wore her dark hair pulled back, practical and unadorned. Her amber eyes, catching the lantern light, had the quality of someone who does not miss much and does not need to be told things twice. She was also, Dorian noted with the part of his brain that continued to make observations regardless of whether the timing was appropriate, objectively striking, in a way that had nothing to do with the fact that she could probably lift him over the rail without significant effort. Iron Hollow, 3 days out, assuming conditions. Autumn crossing of the passage. She looked him over once, slowly, with the frank efficiency of someone assessing cargo. "Why?" Personal reasons, Dorian said. Personal reasons. She repeated it as though tasting how useful that was. The passage in October is not a personal reasons kind of route. It's a very good reasons kind of route. She waited. I have very good reasons, he said. I'll decide that. She uncrossed her arms. Passage costs 40 silver per person in advance. 40 silver. He had 11. The number landed in Dorian's chest with the particular weight of a door closing. He stood on the deck of the Vera in the pre-dawn light and looked at Zola, who was looking at him with the calm patience of someone who has quoted a price before and is comfortable waiting to see what happens next. He thought about Thomas. He thought about the letter. He thought about Iron Hollow and the 4 years and the raft that had lasted 40 minutes and the way his brother had laughed. I should tell you something, Dorian said. Should you? I was a sailor, before, for several years. The words came out with more confidence than they had any right to. I can work the crossing. Whatever you need, sails, watch, cargo, whatever the crew requires. I know my way around a ship. Zola looked at him. He held her gaze with the specific determination of a man who has just said something that is entirely untrue and needs it not to be visible on his face. She was quiet for a long moment. The water moved against the hull. Somewhere along the dock, a rope knocked against a post in the small, irregular rhythm of things acted upon by tide. There's something else, Dorian said before she could answer. I have contacts in Iron Hollow, people who owe me. Among other things, he paused, as though this were incidental. They have maps, charted routes, unmarked passages. At least 2 that I know of cover waters most captains haven't seen. Something shifted in her expression, subtle but there, the particular attention of someone who has heard something that interests them against their better judgment. What kind of passages? The kind that don't appear on standard charts, Dorian said. My contacts have been sailing those routes for years. They documented them. He kept his voice even. The maps would be yours, for the crossing. Zola was quiet again. She looked at him, not the assessing look from before, but something more careful, more particular, as though she were trying to determine which parts of what he had just said were true and which parts were something else entirely. The silence stretched long enough that Dorian became aware of his own heartbeat. Then Zola said, You pull your weight the full crossing, every watch, every task, no exceptions. She held his gaze. And I get those maps. Agreed, Dorian said. She looked at him for one more moment. We leave at first tide, 4 hours. She turned toward the hatch that led below deck, paused, looked back at him over one broad shoulder with the expression of someone who has just made a decision they are not entirely sure about and has decided to make it anyway. Try to get some sleep. You look like you need it. She went below. Dorian stood alone on the deck of the Vera in the pre-dawn dark, with the water moving somewhere beneath his feet and the Ashwater Passage 3 days away and a lie already on the table between them. He put his hand in his pocket, found the folded paper. 4 hours. The Vera left on the first tide, as promised. Dorian was on deck when they cast off, standing near the mast in what he hoped was the stance of a man who had done this before. He had spent the 4 hours between Zola's departure and dawn, sitting on a coil of rope on the pier, not sleeping, watching the water and having a quiet and unproductive argument with himself about the various ways the next 3 days could go wrong. By the time the crew began moving around the ship in the gray pre-sunrise light, he had catalogued most of them. The crew of the Veira numbered 6, not counting Zola. They were a varied collection in the way of people assembled for function rather than compatibility. 2 broad and weathered men who communicated primarily in gestures. A young woman who moved through the rigging with the unhurried ease of someone who has grown up doing exactly this. An older man with very few teeth and an apparently inexhaustible supply of rope-related opinions. A compact and silent figure who seemed to be responsible for everything below deck. And a large red-haired man named Breck, who was the first to notice Dorian standing by the mast, and gave him the specific look of someone sizing up how much trouble a new addition to the ship is likely to cause. Zola was at the helm as they left the harbor, and she handled the ship with the same economy she brought to everything. No wasted movement, no unnecessary words, just the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and expects the same of everyone around them. Dorian watched the dock of Valdenmoor recede behind them and felt the motion of the ship change as they cleared the harbor mouth and met the open water. The open water had opinions. Not dramatic opinions, not yet. The sea was, by objective measure, calm. The sky was the pale, clear blue of an October morning, with no clouds visible in any direction, and the wind was steady and cooperative, filling the sails with the productive enthusiasm of weather that is doing its job. By any reasonable standard, it was a fine morning to be at sea. Dorian gripped the rail. The motion was not rough. It was not violent. It was simply constant. The long, unhurried roll of a ship on open water, a rhythm that had no beginning and no end, that went on and on and on, with the patient persistence of something that does not know it is causing a problem. The deck moved under his feet in a way that the dock had not. The horizon rose and fell by small degrees. The world had acquired a gentle but insistent instability that Dorian's body was registering with increasing clarity. He breathed carefully. He looked at the horizon, which he had heard somewhere was the correct thing to do. The horizon continued to rise and fall. He was fine. He was absolutely fine. He was an experienced sailor of several years' standing, and this was a calm morning on a well-run ship, and there was nothing whatsoever wrong with him. "First watch," Zola said from behind him. He turned. She was standing a few feet away with the expression of someone who has been watching him grip the rail for the past 10 minutes and has found it informative. "You're on rigging check with Senna," she said, nodding toward the young woman in the ropes above. "She'll show you what needs doing." "Of course," Dorian said, in the voice of a man who knows what rigging check means. Zola looked at him for a half-second longer than necessary. Then she went back to the helm. Senna showed him what rigging check meant, which involved moving around the ship in ways that brought him into more direct contact with its motion than standing at the rail had. He focused on what she told him, repeated the tasks when asked, and concentrated very hard on not thinking about the horizon. He was fine for 2 hours. It was the smell of the midday meal being prepared below that made things worse. Not because it was an unpleasant smell, it wasn't, but because it arrived at exactly the wrong moment, when the ship had found a particular angle to the swell that produced a rolling motion somewhat more pronounced than what had come before, and Dorian's body, which had been conducting a quiet internal negotiation for the past several hours, abruptly concluded the negotiation. He made it to the rail. He stood there with both hands gripping the wood and looked at the water below him with the focused attention of a man in active conversation with his own digestive system. The conversation was not going in his favor. "You look pale," said a voice beside him. He did not need to look to know it was Zola. He could tell from the quality of the silence that preceded the comment, the specific silence of someone who has arrived at a scene they have been anticipating with some private entertainment. "I'm fine," Dorian said. "You don't look fine." "It was the fish. At the tavern last night. Something was off about it." A pause. "The fish. I noticed it at the time, but didn't think much of it." Another pause. Longer. "You ate bad fish that has chosen to make itself known now, at sea, on the first day." "Apparently." He heard the sound she made, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something that lived productively between the two. Then he felt her hand come down on his shoulder. Large, solid, steady. The hand of someone who has kept their footing on ships in weather that would put most people on the floor, holding him at the rail with the comfortable authority of someone who is not going anywhere. He looked up. She was grinning. Not unkindly. There was nothing in it that wished him harm. It was the grin of someone who is genuinely, thoroughly, completely amused by what they are looking at, and who has no intention of pretending otherwise. "The fish," she said again, tasting the word. And then she said, with the cheerful certainty of someone delivering a verdict they have already reached, "If the sea doesn't finish you, I just might." She laughed. It was a full laugh, unheld, filling the space above the water with the sound of someone who finds the world genuinely funny on a regular basis and is not shy about it. The crew nearby, Breck, the toothless rope man, Senna descending from the rigging, all looked over. One of them smiled. The laugh was not the kind that invites others to join in cruelty. It was the kind that simply announces that something is funny, and anyone who disagrees is welcome to their opinion. Dorian straightened up from the rail. His face was doing several things at once. He looked at Zola, who was still grinning, her hand still on his shoulder with the easy warmth of someone who hasn't thought to remove it yet. "Brave fish," he said. She laughed again, shorter this time, surprised out of her, a real one. Her hand dropped from his shoulder. She turned back toward the helm. "Stay on deck, fresh air, not below." He stayed on deck. The afternoon was better, which was either because his body had reached some accommodation with the motion of the ship, or because humiliation had distracted him from nausea. He did the tasks assigned to him, not well and not quickly, but consistently. And if any of the crew found his performance remarkable for a man who claimed several years of sailing experience, they did not say so to his face. Senna was the most patient with him. She showed things twice without comment and did not react to his mistakes with anything more than a brief redirection. She was perhaps 19, with the quiet self-containment of someone who has been competent at something since they were young and no longer feels any need to establish this. Once, during the late afternoon, she glanced at him while he was struggling with a knot that was apparently simple and said, "You'll get it." He wasn't sure if she meant the knot or something larger. He appreciated it either way. Breck, for his part, watched Dorian's efforts with the expression of a man who has formed an opinion and is keeping it to himself for now. He was not unfriendly. He was simply measuring. Dorian had the sense that Breck's good opinion was a thing that had to be earned in specifics, not given in advance, and that whatever measure he was applying was not yet complete. Zola came and went across the deck through the afternoon with the continuous attention of someone who is always partly managing 3 things at once. She did not check on Dorian specifically, but he was aware that very little on the ship escaped her notice. Once, passing behind him while he was working on the rigging, She paused long enough to correct his grip on the rope without stopping, just reached over, adjusted his hands, and kept moving, like it was incidental, like she had simply passed by a rope that needed attending and had attended it. The correction was impersonal and efficient, and also, somehow, not either of those things. He focused on the rigging. By the time the sun was going down, painting the Ashwater Passage in the particular gold of late October evenings, Dorian had settled into something that resembled, if not competence, then at least consistency. His hands were raw in new places. His legs had begun to understand that this surface was going to keep moving and had adjusted their opinion of balance accordingly. His stomach had concluded its negotiations and reached a state of armed truce with the sea. He was sitting on the deck near the bow, watching the last of the light on the water, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Zola was standing there, with a small clay cup in one hand. She held it out to him without ceremony, without preamble, without the grin that had accompanied most of her interactions with him today. Just the cup. He took it. It smelled strongly of something herbal and sharp, ginger and something else he couldn't identify, something briny and medicinal that suggested it had been assembled with specific purpose rather than flavor in mind. He looked at it. He looked at her. She had already turned and was walking back toward the stern, her hands clasped behind her, looking out at the water with the expression of someone who has done something incidental and is thinking about something else entirely. He drank it. It was not pleasant. It was also, within 10 minutes, considerably effective. The low, persistent unease that had been sitting somewhere behind his ribs since that morning, loosening in a way that had nothing to do with time passing and everything to do with whatever was in the cup. He sat with the empty cup in his hands as the last light left the water and the first stars appeared in the cold October sky, and thought about the way she had simply handed it to him without a word. No commentary, no extension of the joke, just the cup. He turned it over in his hands, set it beside him on the deck. The sea moved beneath him in its constant, unhurried way, and the Veira moved with it, and somewhere in the growing dark ahead of them was the Ashwater Passage, and 3 days of water between here and Thomas, and whatever waited at the other end. Dorian looked at the stars for a while. He would return the cup in the morning. The second day began clear. That was the thing about the Ashwater Passage that the captains in Valdenmoor had tried to explain, and that Dorian had not fully understood until he was inside it. The danger was not announced. It did not arrive with dark skies and building swells and the kind of atmospheric warning that gives a person time to prepare themselves. The passage simply waited, with the patient indifference of something that does not need to hurry, and when it decided to express itself, it did so without preamble. The morning was, by any measure, beautiful. The sky was the deep, unclouded blue of autumn at its best, the kind of sky that makes the world look freshly made. The water caught the early light and held it in the particular way of open sea, not reflecting it so much as containing it, the surface shifting and gleaming with the slow, systemic motion of something very large and very old going about its business. The wind was steady, and the ship moved well, and even Dorian, whose relationship with the sea was still in early and tentative stages, could feel something in it that he understood, distantly, to be why people chose this life. He had returned the clay cup to Zola at dawn. She had taken it without comment, turned it over once in her hands as though checking it for damage, and set it on the shelf above the helm. That was all. No acknowledgement of what it had been for, no resumption of yesterday's comedy. Just the cup, received and put away, and then her attention back on the water ahead. He had found this, inexplicably, more affecting than if she had said something. He worked his second morning watch with more competence than the first. Not good competence. He was still slower than he should be on the rigging, and his knot work remained a source of patient suffering for anyone watching. But the kind of improving competence that comes when a body learns something new through repetition rather than instruction. Senna corrected him twice. Breck corrected him once, which felt like progress. The toothless rope man, whose name turned out to be Celt, watched him work for a while and then said, with considerable authority, that his left-hand grip was wrong and showed him why. The correction worked. Dorian filed it away with the other things he was accumulating that he had not known yesterday. It was around the midpoint of the morning that Zola, at the helm, went still. Not the ordinary stillness of someone focused on their work, a different kind. The stillness of someone whose attention has sharpened in a specific direction and is now processing something the rest of the ship hasn't yet perceived. Dorian noticed because he had been, without particularly intending to, watching her at intervals throughout the morning. She was difficult not to watch when she was working. There was a quality to the way she operated the ship that was its own kind of instruction. Not in the technical specifics, but in the principle of it, the way she moved through decisions without hesitating, the way she read the ship's behavior the way other people read faces. Now she was looking at the horizon to the northwest, with her head slightly turned, and her expression had changed in a way he couldn't name but recognized by instinct as significant. "Senna," she said, without raising her voice. Senna was at the Veyra's side in seconds. They exchanged a brief, low conversation that Dorian couldn't hear. Senna's eyes went to the northwest horizon, came back to Zola, and she nodded once. The nod of someone who has been told something they believe. Then Zola's voice went out across the deck, and it was not the quiet navigational voice of the past day and a half. It was the other voice, the one that carries without effort and lands without ambiguity. "All hands, secure everything that moves, now!" The sky was still blue. That was the thing Dorian kept returning to as the crew moved around him with the sudden, coordinated urgency of people executing a drill they have run before. The sky was still the clear, deep blue of the beautiful morning, and the water was still catching the light, and there was no visible reason for the absolute seriousness that had taken over the deck of the Veyra in the space of 30 seconds. He stood for a moment, not knowing where to put himself. "You," Breck said, appearing at his shoulder with the cargo netting he'd been carrying. "Help me with this. Do what I do." Dorian did what Breck did. They were lashing down the supply crates near the stern when the wind changed. It did not build gradually. It did not give notice. It simply shifted, direction, speed, character, in the space of a single breath, going from the steady, cooperative wind of the morning to something with an entirely different intention. The surface of the water changed with it, the long, easy swells reorganizing themselves into something choppier and more insistent, and the sky to the northwest, which had been clear 30 seconds ago, had developed a quality that Dorian could only describe as a decision being made at great distance and moving toward them. "Tighten that line," Breck said. Dorian tightened the line. The storm came in the time it takes to finish securing a cargo net. What followed was not like anything Dorian had framing for. He had imagined storms at sea the way most people who have not experienced them imagine them, as large versions of storms on land, with rain and wind and the dramatic vocabulary of weather that announces itself. This was something else. The passage did not produce a storm so much as it became one. the water rising in walls that seemed too large to be real, the ship tilting at angles that his body registered as fundamentally wrong. The noise of it filling everything until there was no space in his awareness for anything except the immediate physical fact of what was happening and what he was trying to hold on to. He lost sight of Zola for a while. He could hear her voice. She was still at the helm, still directing, the voice cutting through the noise with the force of something that has decided it will be heard regardless of competing volume. He could not see her through the rain and the spray and the general reorganization of where things were relative to where they had been. He stayed where he was and held on and did what people told him. It was Celt who found the breach. The old man appeared from the hatch with water streaming off him and more urgency in his face than Dorian had yet seen there. He went straight to Breck and said 3 words. Breck said something back. And then they were both moving toward the hatch, and Breck turned to Dorian and said, "Below. Now. Move." The lower deck was dark and loud with the sounds of the storm transmitted through the hull. A different sound than from above, deeper, more structural, the sound of wood doing the thing wood does when very large forces are applied to it. The breach was near the bow, a seam that the storm had found and was using. Water was coming in, not catastrophically, not yet, but with the determined consistency of something that intends to continue. There were 4 of them below, Breck, Celt, the compact silent crew member whose name Dorian had learned was Fen, and Dorian himself. The rest had stayed above to hold the ship. The work was simple in concept and brutal in execution. The breach needed to be packed and braced before it widened. There were materials for exactly this, oakum and pitch and the specific wooden bracing pieces stored in a compartment that Fen went to without hesitation. The difficulty was the motion of the ship, which made every action take 3 times as long as it would have in stillness, and the water, which was cold and persistent and indifferent to what they were trying to do. Dorian did not know how to do any of this. He did it anyway. He watched what the others did and replicated it as closely as he could manage. When Celt needed someone to hold a brace in place while he worked, Dorian held it. When the pitch needed to be applied in a specific way that his first attempt got wrong, Fen corrected him without words, simply moved his hands to the right position and left them there until he had it. When a board needed to be held against the hull with his full body weight while Breck drove the brace in, he put his full body weight against it and held it. His hands went numb from the water. He couldn't tell if he was doing it correctly. He did it. At some point, he had no sense of how long they had been below. The quality of the work changed. The urgency did not decrease, but there was a shift in it, from the urgency of a situation still being decided to the urgency of a situation that has been decided and is being concluded. The breach stopped growing. The water coming in slowed. The brace held. Celt made a sound that was not a word, but was clearly a positive assessment of the situation. Breck exhaled through his nose and sat back on his heels and looked at the patched breach with the expression of a man reviewing work he is not unhappy with. "Good," he said, to all of them, and also, specifically, with a brief glance to Dorian. It was 1 word. Dorian held on to it. They came back up on deck to a sky that was still moving, but had lost its worst intention. The waves were still heavy, but had relinquished the wall-like quality of the storm's peak. The rain had thinned. The horizon, which had been invisible for what felt like hours, was visible again, irregular and churned, but there. Zola was still at the helm. She was wet through, her hair loose from where it had been tied, her coat dark with rain. She was surveying the deck with the comprehensive focus of someone doing a damage assessment in real time, checking everything, everyone, the ship's response to each shift of the wheel. She moved her gaze across the deck methodically. It reached Dorian. He was standing near the hatch, wet and cold, and with hands that were going to have opinions about what he'd just put them through. He was not sure what his face was doing. He had not had time to arrange it into anything in particular. Zola looked at him. Not the grin of yesterday, not the assessment of the first morning. Something different. A look with more in it than either of those. Something that was taking him in, not as a passenger or a problem or a source of entertainment, but as a specific person who had just done a specific thing and was being seen doing it. She held it for a moment. Then she turned back to the helm. "Breck, check the starboard line." "Aye," Breck said. The ship moved on. Dorian stood on the wet deck in the thinning rain and felt the Vera beneath his feet. Solid, damaged in a small way that had been addressed, still moving. The horizon ahead was the same horizon it had been this morning, the same direction, the same distance away. He went to find the rope Senna had been showing him. He still had a watch to finish. The evening after the storm had the quality of something earned. The crew moved through the closing tasks of the day with the particular efficiency of people who have been through something together. Quieter than usual, more deliberate, the kind of tired that comes from being required to be fully present for too long. There was food, distributed by Fen from something that had survived the storm below deck. There was the low sound of the ship on calmer water. There was the sky, cleared completely as though the afternoon had never happened, filling up with stars from edge to edge, more of them than seemed necessary, sharp and cold and very far away. Dorian ate what he was given and did not taste it, and felt, in some remote part of himself, almost peaceful. His hands were going to be a problem in the morning. They had made their views known as the adrenaline of the afternoon had faded, and those views were not favorable. He had wrapped them in cloth from the kit below deck and tried not to think about them, which was working adequately. The crew settled into their watches and their rest. Breck nodded at him as he passed, a specific nod, different from the measuring looks of the past 2 days. Kelt said something Dorian didn't quite catch, but that had the rhythm of a compliment. Senna simply smiled at him and went below. He was sitting at the bow in the dark, watching the water, when he heard her footsteps. He knew them by now, the particular weight and rhythm of Zola moving across her own deck. He did not look up immediately. He let her arrive at her own pace, which was what she did when she had decided to go somewhere, moving without hesitation, sitting down on the deck beside him with the unself-conscious ease of someone who does not require an invitation to occupy space on their own ship. She had a cup of something. She held it out. He took it. Not the medicinal preparation of the night before, something warmer, simpler. Tea, or the closest thing to it that existed on a working ship. He drank and felt the warmth of it move through him. They sat in silence for a while. It was not uncomfortable silence. It had the quality of two people who have been in close proximity through something difficult and have arrived at the far end of it and are content, for now, to simply be at the far end of it without turning it into anything. The water moved, the stars did what they do, the ship creaked in its own language. "Your hands," Zola said. "They're fine," Dorian said. A pause. "Let me see." He held them out. She took them, both, without ceremony, turning them palm up in hers and looking at the cloth wrappings with the same assessment she brought to everything. No drama, just a clear-eyed accounting of what was there. You held the brace. For Breck. Count needed someone to hold it. But you stayed. He said nothing. She released his hands, produced a small tin from her coat, and applied something to the raw sections of his palms with efficient thoroughness. Her hands were steady and paid attention to what they were doing. He paid attention to her paying attention. When she was done, she closed the tin and turned back to the water. He flexed his hands. Whatever she had applied was already working. "Thank you," he said. She made a sound that was not exactly acknowledgement and not exactly dismissal, but lived somewhere between. The sound of someone who has accepted a thank you without requiring it. The silence came back. Comfortable again, the same quality as before. It was Dorian who broke it. He was not sure exactly why he started talking. The stars, maybe, too many of them, and the storm had taken something from him that had been clenched a long time and left the space feeling strangely open. "My brother loved the sea," he said. Zola did not move, did not turn toward him, simply received this the way she received most things, with complete stillness and a quality of listening that did not demand anything. "Older than me by 2 years, Thomas." He turned the cup in his hands. "We grew up inland, about as far from water as you can get. No reason for him to love it the way he did. He'd never even seen it until we were teenagers. But he read about it constantly, talked about it, knew the names of ships and routes and currents like other boys knew the names of horses. He was like that with everything he loved, all the way in." The stars made their cold light above them. "We built a raft one summer," Dorian said, "on the river near our town. Took us 3 weeks. Thomas had drawings, plans, measurements. He'd read about how to do it, and he explained the whole thing to me very seriously, and we built it exactly the way he said. It lasted about 40 minutes. Something shifted in Zola's posture. Not much, but there. "We went in?" "Completely, both of us. The river was not deep, but it was cold, and we were absolutely soaked. He laughed so hard he couldn't swim. I had to pull him out. He was still laughing on the bank. I was furious." A beat. Then I started laughing too. Zola was looking at the water. Her expression had the quality of someone who is listening not just to what is being said, but to the thing underneath it. "He left when he was 19, Dorian said. First real voyage. A merchant ship, southern route, nothing especially dangerous by reputation." He stopped. He didn't come back. No word, no wreck found, no explanation. He was just gone. The sea took him and didn't leave anything behind. The silence that followed had a different weight than the ones before it. I spent 2 years not looking. I told myself it was because there was nothing to find. I think it was because I was afraid of what I'd find. He looked at the stars. Then I got a letter. A sailor who'd been in Iron Hollow said he'd seen someone matching Thomas's description, working on a boat, living in the settlement. Might be nothing. Might be a different person. He turned the cup over in his hands. Might not be. He stopped. Zola said, "So you came." "So I came," he agreed, and then, more quietly, he would have laughed at me for being sick on the first day. He would have found that genuinely funny. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He sounds like someone worth looking for." It was simply said, no consolation in it, no performance of feeling, just the plain statement, offered without decoration, which was somehow the most useful thing anyone had said to him about Thomas in 4 years. He did not trust himself to respond to it directly. He looked out at the water instead. The silence that came after had a different texture, softer, more porous, the kind that forms between people when something real has been said and there is no hurry to cover it with something else. It was long enough that Dorian had begun to think she might not say anything more tonight, and then she spoke. I grew up in Creswick, port town on the southern coast, small, the kind of place that smells like fish no matter what direction the wind is coming from. He waited. My mother was not well suited to having a child. She said it without inflection, the words laid down the way you lay down something heavy that you have been carrying a long time and have developed a very efficient way of setting. She drank. She was not kind. I spent most of my time in the port because it was not the place where she was. The men on the docks, some of them were rough, some of them were not, some of them ignored me, and some of them didn't mind a girl underfoot who could tie a knot and carry a coil of rope without being told twice. I learned things. I listened to the stories. She looked at the water with the expression of someone looking at something they know well from long acquaintance. The sea was the first thing that ever seemed large enough to be worth wanting. Dorian did not say anything. When I was 16, I told my mother I was going to be a captain one day. She told me I was as worthless as my father, that I didn't know who my father was, and that I should stop wasting her time with things that were never going to happen. The stars, the water, the ship. That was the last time I spoke to her. I left the next morning, and I worked every ship that would take me, and I saved every coin that didn't need to go somewhere else, and 12 years ago, I bought the Vera. She was quiet for a moment. She was in worse condition than I've ever admitted to anyone. It took me 2 years, and most of what I had left, to make her what she is now. She looked at the helm, where the ship was holding steady on its course, self-possessed in the dark water. My mother is probably still in Creswick. I have no intention of finding out. The parallel lay between them without either of them naming it. His search for the person the sea had taken, her distance from the person she had left behind. Both of them shaped by something that had started before they had a say in it. Dorian looked at her. She was looking at the water, her face in profile against the stars, and there was something in it that he had not seen before. Not the grin, not the assessment, not the authority of the helm. Something quieter and more particular. Something that had been here all along, underneath the other things, and was showing itself now because it was late, and the stars were too many, and they had just been through a storm together, and she had decided, for reasons of her own, that he was someone she could say true things to. He was aware, with a clarity that was inconvenient given everything else that was currently happening in his life, that she was extraordinary. He turned back to the water. "You know," he said after a moment, "there's something I should probably—" She looked at him. Not the half attention of someone waiting for a pause. Full attention. Turn toward him the way you turn toward something you are actually listening to. "What?" she said. He opened his mouth. The thing was right there. The maps, the lie, the 11 silver coins, and the 40 he didn't have. The fact that there were no contacts in Iron Hollow with charted routes, and there never had been. It was right there, and it would have been the correct thing to say, and he had been wanting to say it since somewhere in the middle of the first day, and possibly since before they left the dock. He looked at her face in the starlight. "The stars look different out here," he said. A pause, small and complete. Zola looked at the stars. "They do," she said. She said nothing else. She did not push, did not ask what he had been about to say, simply accepted the thing he had given her instead of the thing he should have, and let the night have its silence back. They sat together a while longer. Eventually she stood, in the unhurried way of someone who has decided a thing is finished. She picked up her cup. She looked down at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't read in the dark, something that was not the grin and not the assessment and not the look from the aftermath of the storm either. Something that had no single name. Sleep. We reach the passage entrance at dawn. She walked back toward the helm. He sat with his cup and the stars and the sound of the water, and the thing he had not said sitting somewhere in his chest like a stone he had chosen to keep in his pocket. He would say it tomorrow. He would say it tomorrow, and she would have the right to be angry, and he would accept that, and it would still have been true, whatever this night had been, regardless of what came after it. He turned the cup in his bandaged hands and looked at the stars and let himself, for one more hour, simply be here. Iron Hollow arrived the way destinations arrive after long travel, not dramatically, not all at once, but as a gradual accumulation of evidence that land exists and is getting closer. A change in the color of the water, the appearance of birds, a smell that was different from open sea, wood smoke and mud, and the particular organic complexity of a place where people live close to the shoreline and have been doing so for a long time. Dorian was at the bow when the settlement came into view. It was not a large place. A cluster of buildings on a rocky shore, a small dock extending into a natural harbor, fishing boats, and one larger vessel moored in the gray morning light. The kind of settlement that exists because a particular piece of geography makes it useful. Sheltered water, fish, access to trade routes that pass nearby, rather than because anyone set out to build something significant here. He looked at it and felt his chest do something complicated. Thomas could be here. Thomas could have been here and left. Thomas could have never been here at all, and the letter could have been a mistake, a different man, a story assembled from resemblance and distance and the way memory works when people are trying to be helpful. He breathed. The Veira came into the harbor with the practiced ease that characterized everything Zola did. No wasted motion, the ship finding its berth as though it had always known where it was going. The crew worked the lines. The gangplank went down. Zola appeared beside him. She was looking at the settlement with the expression of a captain doing a professional assessment of an unfamiliar port, noting the dock conditions, the depth, the practical inventory of a place she might need to know. Then she looked at him, and the expression shifted to something more direct. She had not said anything for 3 days, not because she hadn't known, but at sea it hadn't mattered. What had mattered was what he did. "Dorian," she said. He turned. She was looking at him with those amber eyes that saw everything and gave away only what they chose to. She held his gaze for a moment. "There are no maps," she said. It was not a question. It was not angry. It was simply a fact being spoken aloud, quietly, between two people who both already knew it. He opened his mouth. "And you've never sailed a day in your life," she said. He closed his mouth. The harbor sounds continued around them, the creak of rope, the low voices of crew, a gull somewhere making its opinion known. The ordinary world going about its business while this particular moment held still inside it. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out without preamble or decoration, the way true things come out when there is no point in anything else. "The passage was the only way. You were the only ship. I had 11 silver, and I needed to get here, and I told you what I thought you needed to hear." He held her gaze. It was wrong. I knew it when I said it." Zola looked at him. The silence was long enough that he became aware again of his own heartbeat, aware of the gangplank behind him, aware of the settlement on the shore where Thomas might or might not be waiting. "The maps were never the reason I took you," she said. He went still. She turned back toward the helm, moving with the purposeful, unhurried quality she always moved with, already returning to the work of the ship and the harbor and the 100 things a captain attends to when a voyage reaches its end. At the gangplank she paused, looked back at him over one broad shoulder. "We leave at sunrise. Be back before then." She walked away to command the docking. Dorian stood on the deck of the Vera and watched her go and held those 6 words, "The maps were never the reason," in his chest like something he wasn't ready to put down yet. Then he picked up his coat, walked down the gangplank, and went to find his brother. Iron Hollow was the kind of settlement that kept its information close. The people Dorian spoke to in the first hour were polite in the way of people who deal with strangers regularly and have developed a careful efficiency about it, answering what was asked and not extending beyond it, offering nothing that hadn't been requested. He described Thomas. He described him twice, 3 times, in different combinations of detail. He got 3 variations of the same careful consideration, followed by the same uncertain shrug. He did not let himself feel what he would feel if this was nothing. He kept moving. It was in the 4th place he tried, a supply store near the far end of the dock, run by a woman of perhaps 60, with the specific watchfulness of someone who notices everything that passes through a small harbor, that something changed. She listened to his description. She was quiet for a moment, her hands still on the counter. There was a man. A couple of years back he started coming through. Brown hair, about your height, always asking questions about the archipelago routes. She looked at Dorian with an assessing quality that reminded him, briefly, of someone else. He had a way of talking about the water, like it was something he'd been thinking about his whole life. Dorian's hands were very still at his sides. He was here as recently as yesterday, working passage on the Meridian. They left yesterday morning. A pause. Heading for the Gray Archipelago. The Gray Archipelago. 3 words that landed in his chest like something physical. Did he leave anything? Any word? He left a name. Few weeks back he came in and said someone might come looking for him before long. Didn't say how he knew, just left this and asked me to pass it on. She reached under the counter and produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out. He took it, unfolded it. 1 line, in handwriting he would have known anywhere, in any condition, under any circumstances, because he had watched it develop from childhood. The particular looping quality of Thomas's letters, the way he made his T's with that slight leftward lean. "Tell Dorian I'm going to need a faster ship." Dorian stood in the supply store in Iron Hollow and read the line 4 times. His brother had been here yesterday. His brother had left him a note. His brother had known he was coming. He folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket alongside the other one, and stood for a moment with both hands pressed flat against his coat, feeling the shape of both pieces of paper through the fabric. Then he thanked the woman, walked out into the gray morning light of Iron Hollow, and stood on the dock looking at the water. The Gray Archipelago. A day's sail further, maybe 2. Unmarked on most charts. The kind of place that accumulated stories the way harbors accumulate driftwood. Not deliberately, just because of how the currents ran. He could not get there alone. He did not need to think about this for long. Zola was at the helm when he came back up the gangplank, running through the post-voyage checks with the systematic attention she brought to everything. She looked up when she heard him on the deck, looked at his face. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She came down from the helm and stood in front of him, and he told her everything. The supply store, the woman, the note. He took it out of his pocket and held it up, and she read it from where she stood, and something in her expression shifted in a way he couldn't fully read, but that was not indifferent. He told her the rest of it too, because there was no reason not to anymore. The 11 silver, the 40 he didn't have, the contacts in Iron Hollow who had never existed, the charted routes that were a story he had assembled in 4 minutes on a dark dock at dawn because she had quoted him a price and he had needed her to say yes. He told her all of it. When he finished, she was quiet. He waited. "The Gray Archipelago," she said. "Yes. 2 days out from here, more if the weather turns." She looked at the water with the expression of someone running a calculation that involves more than numbers. Difficult navigation, not impossible. "I know I have no right to ask," Dorian said. "I lied to get on your ship. I have no money and no maps and nothing to offer you except the fact that my brother is out there and he left me a note that says he needs a faster ship." He held her gaze. "But I'm asking." Zola looked at him for a long moment. The harbor moved around them, the ordinary sounds of a working dock, the water, the birds, the creak of the Vera settling against its moorings. Then, she said, "Everyone who ever stepped on this ship came with something they weren't saying. You think you're the first man to lie his way onto my deck?" He said nothing. "The sea doesn't care why you came. It only cares what you do when it gets hard." A pause. "And you didn't run." The words settled between them. She looked at him a moment longer, and it was the look from the aftermath of the storm, the one that had no single name, the one that saw him specifically and without the protection of any other framing. Then she turned away. "We leave at first light. Talk to Breck about provisions. We'll need to resupply before we go." He stood. "Zola." She paused, did not turn around fully, just enough to show she was listening. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in more directions than one. She was quiet for a moment, then, "There's only one rule on my ship." She turned back to the helm. "Don't throw up on it." They left Iron Hollow at first light. The Vera moved out of the harbor in the gray pre-dawn, the way she had left Valdenmoor 3 days ago, quietly, efficiently, with the self-possession of a ship that knows what it is doing. The crew worked the lines and the sails and settled into the rhythms of a new voyage with the ease of people for whom this is simply what mornings are. Dorian was at the bow. He had the 2 pieces of paper in his coat pocket, the letter that had brought him here, and the note in Thomas's handwriting that had told him where to go next. He had his hands on the rail, and his hands felt better than they had yesterday, and the sea was doing what the sea does in the early morning, moving and gray and vast and entirely indifferent to the small human things happening on its surface. He was not gripping the rail. He noticed this after a moment. He was simply resting his hands on it. The difference between holding on and being here, between enduring and standing. It was a small thing. It felt significant. The Vera cleared the harbor mouth and met the open water, and Dorian felt the motion of the ship change beneath him, that long, unhurried roll that had dismantled him on the first morning, that he had learned over 3 days to read as language rather than threat. The ship saying, "I am in the water is moving, this is what it is to be here." Footsteps behind him. He did not need to look. Zola came to stand beside him at the bow. Not at the helm, beside him, which was not where she usually stood when the ship was underway. She looked at the horizon ahead of them with the expression of someone who finds the open water exactly as interesting as they always have and does not expect this to change. They stood in silence for a while. The gray light grew. The stars faded one by one as the sky became something other than dark. Somewhere ahead, at a distance that was not yet visible but was no longer abstract, the gray archipelago was doing what it always did, being there, waiting, indifferent to whether anyone came looking for it or not. "Your brother," Zola said. "Yes. If he's been sailing since he was 19. She considered this. "He's been out here a long time." "He has. He'll know these waters." A pause. "Better than most people who think they do." Dorian looked at the horizon. "Probably." "Then finding him," she said, "is mostly a matter of being the kind of ship worth coming back to." He turned to look at her. She was still looking at the horizon. Her profile against the early sky had the quality of something built for this, for standing at the bow of a ship in the early morning and looking at what came next without flinching. He looked back at the horizon. "He wrote, 'Tell Dorian I need a faster ship. He's been gone 4 years, and that's what he leaves me.'" "Sounds like someone who knew you'd come," Zola said. "He always did know that." He paused. "Even when I didn't." The Vieira moved on through the gray water. The horizon came no closer, the way horizons never do. Always the same distance away, always ahead, always worth moving toward. Dorian thought about a raft that had lasted 40 minutes and the laugh that came after it, and about a note left under a counter in a harbor at the edge of the known routes, and about the specific kind of hope that is not the same as certainty, but is enough to sail on. He stood at the bow of a ship that was not afraid of difficult water, next to a woman who had built everything she had from nothing and sailed it into the open sea, and felt, carefully, not wanting to press too hard on it in case it was more fragile than it seemed, something that might have been, if not peace exactly, then the beginning of the direction in which peace lies. After a while, he smiled at something. Not at her, just at the horizon, at the general shape of how things had turned out. "Zola," he said. For what it's worth." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "The fish, on the first day, it had nothing to do with fish." A pause. She made the sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, the one that lived productively between the two, and that he had come to understand as her most honest expression of amusement. "I know," she said. The sea was large and they were small on it, and somewhere out there, Thomas Ashvale was sailing routes that didn't appear on most charts, and none of this was certain, and all of it was worth the 3 days it had taken to get here. The horizon stayed exactly where it always was. They sailed toward it anyway.
Sometimes, the best thing a person can do is to stay, through the storm, through the silence, and through the moment they found out. Dorian came with a lie, but when things got hard, he didn't run, and Zola noticed. And that's the thing about trust. It isn't built on the things we say, but rather it is built on what we do when no one is watching. Have you ever trusted someone not because of their words, but because of what you saw them do that cost them something? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this story stayed with you, Please subscribe and give us a like. It means much more to us than you think. Thank you.